Hi everybody, my name is Lottie and welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to be talking you through all the books that I read in April. Like last month, before I get into my mini reviews of all the books that I read, I want to run you through some statistics because I'm a nerd and I love keeping track of my reading. So in the month of April, I read 7 books total. That's 1 more than last month and 1 less than my goal, but that is absolutely fine. Those 7 books were the equivalent of 2,572 pages, slightly less than last month, but sort of on par with what I tend to read in a month. Star ratings, I had 1 2.5 star, 2 3 stars, 1 3.5 star, 1 4 star, and 2 5 stars. So it was a right mixed bag in there. There's some books I wasn't that keen on, some books that I absolutely loved. In terms of formats, I listened to 1 audiobook, I read 4 ebooks, and I read 2 physical books. In terms of owned TBR versus books that I had from my library, I read 3 books from the library and 4 books that I pre-owned. For age groups, I read 6 YA and 1 adult, so very rooted in YA this month. And finally, for genres, I read 4 fantasies, 1 thriller, 1 contemporary, and 1 dystopian. So like last month, I'm going to go in order of my star ratings. So we will start with the book that I rated the lowest, which was 2.5 stars, and that is Queen of Coin and Whispers by Helen Corcoran. I listened to this on audiobook from my library. I'd heard a little bit about this before picking it up from another booktuber in a list of sapphic fantasies. So this is a sapphic book, which means it has a female-female romance. Queen of Coin and Whispers is a fantasy and it follows a queen and her master of secrets, or like spy master. They end up falling in love and developing a relationship with each other. I honestly wasn't that into this. I really wanted to like it, but it was very, very political and not a lot of fantasy. I feel like the only fantastical element about it was the fact that it was a fictional kingdom. I don't know if it's because it was on audiobook. I really struggled to comprehend what was happening in the book. I'm trying not to look at Luna. And what was happening that I could comprehend, I just wasn't that into. Don't want to spend a lot of time talking about this book because I didn't really like it. I can't really give you a better description of what it's about other than it's about Queen and her spy master. The spy master character, she was like seeking revenge because her father had been murdered or something. This isn't spoilers, by the way, this all happens at the very start of the book. In general, I just found it difficult to follow. The romantic scenes that were in there were nice, but I didn't really care about any of the characters, so it's quite difficult to root for a romance where I didn't care about either party. It is like a dual perspective, so each other chapter follows like a different character. So, well, I say different character, it's one chapter would follow the queen, the other chapter would follow the spy master, and then it would like switch back and forth between them. But yeah, 2.5 stars. Wasn't really that into it. Moving on to my 3-star reads, I'm going to talk about The Gracia by Liggett first. This is a young adult dystopian / horror. I did quite like it, but it started really weird and ended really weird, but what happened in the middle was really intense and I really enjoyed. In The Gracia, there's this society where it's quite reminiscent of The Handmaid's Tale, where like men are in charge and women aren't really allowed to do anything. Every year a group of girls go to the wilderness for their grace year, which is essentially just sending them off to fend for themselves so that they can be traumatized and then come back and will be subservient to the men. They call it getting rid of their magic, and there's this whole question of, is their magic a real thing or is it made up to oppress the women more? We follow the main character during her grace year and what is happening to her. It's a little bit Hunger Gamesy. The very beginning with there's a thing called Veiling Day, was kind of reminded me of The Reaping, where the girls who are going to go on their grace year are basically proposed to by a man. They don't get any choice in the matter. It's almost like an arranged marriage, and they're like given a veil, and they have to like wear this veil because people aren't allowed to look at them because they're like betrothed or something, and then they go to the wilderness for their grace year, and that was really like Hunger Games because it was all about like trying to survive, and there's people out to get them. There's like these poachers that like if they stray from the campsite, the poachers are like allowed to kill them basically and sell their body parts back to the like society because they use them for like medicines. It's really, really messed up. But what was happening during the Gracia bit in the wilderness was really interesting. It was really tense. It was quite like thrillery. There's a little romance in there as well, which I kind of liked, but the pacing was just off. The book takes place over a whole year, and some things I feel like took a really long time. Like we spend like 3-4 chapters just on like the first few days just before they go on their grace year. While they're on their grace year, like you could spend chapters just on one day, and then like one sentence and like 6 months have gone by or something. So yeah, the pacing was kind of off. When I went into this, I for some reason thought it was an adult novel, and I think if it had been adult I would have liked it more. It really could have like gone the extra mile and been really gruesome and really like, I don't know, messed up. It didn't, and I think it's because it was held back by the fact it was YA and the author maybe didn't want to make it too like gross. But then again, I've read YA books that have been really gross, so yeah, this was just a 3-star for me. It was okay. So my other 3-star read was Truthwitch by Dennard. This is a YA/adult fantasy, first in a series called the Witchlands series. I was reading it for the Witchlands Long, which is hosted by JD Ray Reads. In Truthwitch, it is very political fantasy, and it's quite difficult to describe what it's about because I don't really know what happened in it. It was really fast paced, but essentially in the Witchlands, which is like the name of the continent I guess where they all live, there's like different kingdoms that have all been at war with each other, and they're on a 20-year truce, and the truce is just about to come to the end, so there's quite high tensions. And our main characters, Safi and Iseult, are on the run because they did like highway robbery or something. So they're on the run for like all of this novel, being chased by a blood witch called Ajuan. Safi is a truth witch and Iseult is a thread witch. What I really liked about this book, and what I think I'm going to love about the rest of the books in this series, is the magic system. So with the magic system, it's like elemental magic. So you have the 5 elements: earth, air, fire and water, and then like aether, I think. And then there's also like a 6th one which isn't supposed to exist called void, and then each of the witches will like fit into one of those categories depending on what kind of magic they can do. So Safi, she's a truth witch, so she can like tell when people are lying, when people are being like deceitful. There's a character who is a wind witch and he can like control wind currents. The Ajuan character, he's a blood witch, which is technically like void, and he can essentially like control your blood and like, I don't know, it's kind of difficult to explain. What happens in this book, it's like it was really fast paced right from the get-go. You're thrown straight into the action, and I felt like throughout the whole book I was trying to catch up on what was happening because I was like, oh okay, this is it then, and I was really struggling to keep up. So it's why it's so difficult for me to explain like what it's about, because I was like trying to figure out what was going on throughout the whole of this book. There was not really ever a moment where it slowed down and let you sort of just take in like, okay, this is what's just happened. They're just basically like discussing it, or there's like some character development going on, you know. There was never a moment like that, and I guess some people would really like that because they like fast-paced stuff, but I need that like, not slow start, but just that build-up at the beginning so that I can get my bearings, and then you can throw me straight into it so I know like, okay, this is how it is, this is what's going on. Whereas like throwing me straight into the action at the very start of a high fantasy series where you're getting used to the world and the politics and the magic and all that, oh my god, it was intense. I've been talking about this and I didn't even like hold it up. I read it on ebook and then I later bought a physical copy of it because I liked it enough that I'm going to continue with the series, especially because I'm reading it as part of a read along. I'm gonna collect the books in the series. In terms of like what I enjoyed about it while I was trying to catch up, I really enjoyed the interactions between the different characters. I love character driven stories, so the interactions between the characters was like excellent. The banter between Safi and Merrick was fantastic, loved it. A little bit of romance going on between them. Maybe it'll blossom into something more, maybe not. When I was reading this as well, I was yearning for a fantasy romance. This is not a fantasy romance at all. It's got a little bit of romance in it, but the main thing about it is the political like war that's about to happen. Maybe the fact that I was yearning for a fantasy romance sort of made me not enjoy it as much as I could. I've literally just started Wind Witch, which is the 2nd book in the series. It's like throwing you into the action yet again, but because I already know the characters, it's not quite as intense. But this was really enjoyable. My favourite thing about it is the magic system, so I'm excited to learn more about that. But yeah, it was just kind of difficult to get a grip on what was happening. So moving on to my 3.5-star book this month, it is of course Throne of Glass. I vlogged my entire experience reading this, completely spoiler filled. Please do feel free to check out that video if you would like to. There'll be a link in the cards, but do be warned, it is spoiler filled. However, I will give you my spoiler free thoughts now. So yeah, 3.5 stars. Clearly I didn't love it, but I wasn't expecting to love it because I've heard so many people say like this is basically Sarah J Maas's worst book, and if I've rated her worst book 3.5 stars, it can only get better from here. If you don't know, Throne of Glass is the first in a series which is high fantasy young adult following a character called Selena Sardothian. She is an assassin who has been taken prisoner in some salt mines, and the prince comes to say, hey girl, I want you to be my champion. My dad's having a competition for his royal assassin. So she goes to the palace, she takes part in this competition to become the royal assassin, and you can kind of guess she wins because this is an 8-book series. Sorry if that was a little bit of a spoiler, but like there's 8 books in this series, you can assume that the main character is going to survive. I felt the pacing was off all throughout it. I really couldn't get a grip on how much time was passing between each scene. It started super slow. I feel like the first 25% of the book, absolutely nothing at all happened. I feel like there wasn't even any proper world building. I was just kind of like, yep, okay, we're going to the palace. Is there anything gonna happen? And then the book took a completely different turn to what I was expecting. So because this is about an assassin competition, I was kind of expecting it to have the same sort of vibes as Divergent or Nevernight, where it's about training, or like the first bit of the Hunger Games where they're training before they go into the arena. That whole training competition-y type thing. That's what I was expecting. The assassin competition, it's not the main focus of the story. There's another plot going on that is more important, which is clearly going to be a really important thing for the rest of the books in the series. That's fine. I just don't understand why this is basically described as being about an assassin competition when the assassin competition like wasn't a thing. All the trials, there was basically like a series of trials that they took part in every like couple of weeks, which would eliminate another competitor from the competition, and half the trials weren't on page. I don't know if the trials were like being cancelled because in this there's like the subplot which is actually like the main plot where something or someone is killing all of the other assassins. So maybe like, I don't know, the trials were cancelled because someone had died, but I don't know, because that was never really discussed in the book, so I was a bit like, okay. But yeah, I was quite disappointed that this assassin competition that was promised to me was like not in the story like at all. But I did like getting to meet the main characters, Selena, Kale and Dorian, and then I think Nehemia, I still don't know how to pronounce her name, I'm gonna have to look it up, is also going to be a main character in this. But I did like it, I just wanted more from it, but I was kind of like expecting to feel this way when I was reading it. I was also in a bit of a reading slump while I was reading it. I was really struggling to get through it. I don't think that was the book's fault. I think I just wasn't in like the right mindset for reading it. But yeah, I will be continuing on with this series and I will be vlogging the entire series, so keep an eye out for that on my channel. And if you're not subscribed, maybe you should consider subscribing so you can see my vlogs for the rest of the Throne of Glass series. Shameless plug there. So moving on to my 4-star read, that was Birdbox by Josh Malerman. This is a adult thriller and it got a pretty big movie a few years ago starring Sandra Bullock on Netflix. I don't really want to describe too much about what it's about because I feel like most people who read thrillers like to go into them not knowing a lot, but basically in Birdbox, it's this world where a creature or I don't know, something, if you see it, it makes you go insane, and then you either try and kill yourself or kill other people or just like cause great damage. The people in this story are basically living in this house. They have to like board up all the windows and it's just about them trying to survive. And we follow our main character Mallory, and it's mostly the story about Mallory. The story goes back and forth between present day and the past, and what's happening in the present day is Mallory has these 2 kids and she's trying to get them to a safe place, and then what's happening in the past is the story of what led up to her being with those two kids. I had seen the movie before I read the book, but I wanted to read the book anyway because, I don't know, maybe there was something in it that isn't in the film. They were basically exactly the same, so if you don't want to spend time reading it, you can just watch the film on Netflix. I did watch the film on Netflix again soon after I read it, and like, yeah, it confirmed to me that it was basically the same. It was so enjoyable to read, which is why I gave it 4 stars. I was trying to go into it with the mindset of like reading it for the first time, not knowing what was going to happen, because I couldn't remember what the big like thing was at the end of the book that you tend to find in like thrillers, you know, all the tension builds and then it explodes. I was trying to go into the mindset of like, I don't know anything that's going to happen, and I didn't because I couldn't remember it, but it still kind of let me down because of the fact that it was like the dual perspectives. What the big tension releases, it kind of like was like obvious because that was happening in the past, whereas we already know what's already happening in the present. Yeah, it was kind of like pointless because we already knew that things were going to be okay or not okay, etc. So I feel like maybe I could have loved it more if it was told chronologically, so like instead of having the back and forth between the present and the past, we just had the past and then what happened in the present. But I also think that it wouldn't have been as tense if that was the case, because it was like you would have a tension, something really tense happening, and then it would switch to the other perspective. It's like, oh my god, what's going to happen, you know? It was definitely a choice of the storytelling, and I think it definitely had its benefits and also had its cons. This book definitely made me feel things. I felt freaked out while I was reading it, I felt really anxious while I was reading it, I was really worried for the characters, so it definitely did its job of making me feel thrilled because it's a thriller. And also because a lot of the story takes place in this one house because they can't go outside, they might die if they see this thing. It felt really claustrophobic. Also with the whole like pandemic thing that's happened over the last year where we haven't been able to go outside, it was like a little too real. So now moving on to my 5-star reads. So these were the 2 best books that I read this month. First of all, I'm going to talk about Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. Clap When You Land is a novel written in verse. It's the first time I've ever read a novel in verse before and I loved it. I was really apprehensive because I'm not really a poetry person, but the whole thing about it being written in verse was fine. So the story of this follows 2 sisters who share the same father, but they don't know that each other exists. So Yahaira lives in New York City with her dad for most of the year, and then Camino lives in the Dominican Republic and her dad comes to visit her like every summer, which is when her birthday is. And their father dies in a plane crash, and it's the story of them dealing with their grief of losing their father and also learning about the fact that each other exists. I absolutely loved this. It was just so lovely. Like the writing, because it was told in verse, was really poetic. It made me feel things. I think it was an excellent way to talk about grief because that's really what the book is about. It's about grief. It's not necessarily about like a plot, and it was sort of really nice to see how the 2 sisters dealt with their grief in different ways. And then also you had the side story of them learning about the fact that they have a sister and how they dealt with the fact that they had a sister that they didn't even know existed until a few weeks ago. It was beautiful, it was flawless. I loved seeing the sisters' relationship develop. It was just such a fantastic read, and I do really recommend that like everybody should read this. And so the last book that I read this month and the last book that I'm going to be talking about in this video was Beneath the Sugar Sky by Seanan McGuire. This is the 3rd book in the Wayward Children series, which is a young adult fantasy series. I don't want to spoil what happens in the book, but this series in general, like people say you can read them out of order. I would say you have to read this book after you've read the 1st book. You can sort of read the 2nd book as its own thing, but I would definitely recommend reading this book after the 1st one because what happens in this book is sort of taking place after the 1st book. We get to see a few more of the portal worlds in this book, which I really enjoyed, but we also revisit the home for wayward children. So we have a lot of familiar characters back. We've got Cade, who was one of my favourite characters from the 1st book, and we get to see 2 of the main Portal World. There was the Underworld one with like the Lord of the Dead, which was basically like Hades and Persephone with the pomegranates. Nancy, there was Nancy's world from the first book, and we also get to see Confection, which is Sumi's world, which is the like high nonsense Candyland thing. And I really liked getting to see Confection because all the Portal Worlds that we've seen so far in the series have all been like logical, and this is the first time we saw a nonsensical one, which I really liked because it was great to see that different aspect of it. I can understand why some of the characters were like, I just don't understand what's going on, but I was like, this is fine, like maybe I would fit into a nonsense world, who knows. So yeah, it was great. I just really enjoyed it. It kind of reminded me of Wreck-It Ralph and the game Sugar Rush in that, and just the whole world just being made of candy, like that was just what it made me think of. Obviously this is a novella, so it was really short, and this was the first book in this series where I felt like the pacing was correct, like there was nothing off about it at all. It was the perfect length. I wasn't yearning for more because the story itself was just like perfectly contained. So I feel like maybe by the third book, the author had gotten the pacing just right. It was beautifully written, as always. Sean McGuire has a really distinct writing style, and I think it really suits a whimsical series like this. I also really liked one of the new main characters we got to see. I can't remember what her name is, but she come from like a mermaid world, and where she was a mermaid. The series is always really diverse. You've got trans characters, you've got gay characters, bi characters, asexual characters, a variety of different races and ethnicities represented. And then like the main character in this book was fat, so it has that fat rep, and it talks about like how before she went to her portal world, people used to make fun of her for her weight, and it's something she was really apprehensive about at the school, and then like everyone just doesn't even care. And I really liked seeing, I really wish I could remember her name. I really like seeing this character like come to just sort of be more comfortable. So these were all the books that I read in April, including my Kindle to represent the ebooks and audiobook that I read as well. I obviously had quite a mixed bag this month. It was all overall a pretty good reading month. I'm really pleased with what I read, and I've managed to get out of a reading slump, so that is great. So May is obviously the month of the Asian Readathon, and I do have a video up talking about all the books I'm planning to read this month. Progress so far, 2 books in. Very pleased with what I've read so far, so we're doing well. But that is it from me today. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and also feel free to subscribe if you would like to see more of my videos. Let me know in the comments what you read in April and what your favourite book this month was. I think mine was probably Beneath the Sugar Sky. So yeah, I think I like that slightly more than California Land. Yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye!